Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the New Fashion Conservatives podcast. I'm your host, Justin Phillips. With me, as always, the leader of the Voss Populi, Shadow Governor Voss.
Robin Voss's strongest soldier, and I appreciate the name.
And joining us tonight, we have a real special guest, someone who's been a fan of ours since the beginning, and we feel the same way about him. The minute and he announced he'd be running for lieutenant governor, he reached out to us to join the program. So here we have today former Lancaster mayor and GOP lieutenant governor candidate David Varnum. Welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
So walk us through. You just started your campaign a little over a month ago, right? And been traveling around the state. I thought I saw 2,200 miles so far. So tell us how it's been going.
It's been going really well. You referenced the mileage. That has changed. It's always going up. The very first full week of October, just that week alone, I did over 2,500 miles, because when you're running for lieutenant governor or any statewide office, you got to put the time in, you got to put the effort in, and you got to go to those communities. And so even during that week, I was in Hayward, I was in Neenah, Monroe, I was at Kenosha. So you hit all the places, all the corners of the state, because we need change in this state. And the only way you're going to make that happen is if you put yourself forward and you try to make that change. And so it takes effort. And that's what I've been trying to do.
So tell us a highlight so far.
You know, I really enjoy people and hearing their stories and hearing what concerns them and them hearing my stories and concerns. If you're on the campaign trail and you've heard me talk, I talk about my daughters. I talk about my wife. I talk about their future and my concerns about it. And it's encouraging to hear people and their stories that they want to see that change, but also the people that tell you the heartbreaking story of how inflation has hurt their family or hurt their job, or the different things that have happened because of the Biden economy, because of the Evers economy, and why they want to see that change in 2026.
So you also ran for lieutenant governor in 2022. What lessons did you learn from that primary, and how are you applying them to the 2026 campaign?
Well, there's good lessons and bad lessons, right? The bottom line is I needed to do better. I needed to get more votes, and I needed to raise more money. And so that has been a big goal, is to do better at fundraising this time around. I won 2 counties down in the southwest corner, Grant County, Lafayette County. I received the most votes there. Those are people that knew me. People that knew me, they voted for me. And so the very basic goal is more people need to get to know me. More people need to hear my message. And the way that you do that is by doing more events, by getting out there more, and by fundraising so you can spread that message. And that is a lesson that I'm going to have to work a lot harder on, but we're going to hope to capitalize on that. Fell short, but like I said, won 2 counties. I was one of only 3 candidates in that field of like 1 million people. I was one of 3 that won their home county. In all seriousness, there was 8 on the ballot, 9 that were running, 8 that qualified for the ballot. 6 of the 8 won a county. And so it was such an interesting field. I enjoy politics. I enjoy reading about politics. And I feel like that race is going to be a race that people are going to look at in the future because of how crazy it was that you had all these candidates. And like I said, only 3 won their home county, but you had all these candidates from different parts of the state, especially the southeast corner, that were winning states in the northwest corner. You know, why was that? I think that would be a question that people will be looking at.
Well, it certainly seems like you're doing the work so far. You know, looking at social media alone, I think you've posted from, at least a dozen counties already. And so you're putting in that work to, go to the Pints and Politics, go to the caucus dinners or Lincoln Day dinners, everything that's going on. So certainly taking that to heart right away and hitting the ground running when it comes to that retail politics.
Yep, that's what you have to do. You have to be going to the counties and the party functions and meeting voters where they're at. I've traveled to 15 counties in less than 3 weeks of campaigning. So trying really hard to get out there. And like I said, I've been in every corner of the state so far, and just working hard to make sure that people know who I am and they know what I'm about, because I think I have a very unique message and a very unique background that I can talk about and share with them.
Yeah. Can you walk us through that background? So your journey started, you served as a congressional aide, you were a policy analyst for Focus on the Family, became mayor of Lancaster. So how do those experiences, shape your conservative worldview?
Well, for starters, having worked with Dr. Dobson at Focus on the Family, that's a very conservative, pro-family worldview. I became
Definitely.
a Christian in college and interned at Focus on the Family. And when I was done, they said, if you'd like to come back and join us when you graduate, we'd like to have you. And then a few days before I made the move to Focus on the Family, I found out that I was going to be the legislative analyst for Dr. Dobson. And let me tell you, that was a very unique experience. But I worked for him for about 2 years and then left to go back home and marry my high school sweetheart, Jessica. And while she was in medical school and finishing up college, I worked for a member of Congress whose office I had worked with when I was at Focus on the Family. So I was living in suburban Los Angeles, working for one of the most conservative members of Congress. And I was a district aide who handled the issues of housing, water, and transportation. And then fast forward, I became later on a mayor of a rural city in rural Wisconsin. And so a very unique background of very large city issues and very small city and rural issues, which I think is unique. But to fill in a little bit of the middle there, my wife finished up med school, went to residency in Texas. And while she was there, very early on, we found out she was pregnant. And I became a stay-at-home dad. So I went from congressional aide to stay-at-home dad in a matter of a few months and stayed at home with them. And when we moved to Lancaster, because my wife wanted to be a rural physician, so we found ourselves in Wisconsin. And less than 2 years after we had lived here, I was appointed to the city council. And 3 years after that, I ran for mayor and was elected. Actually, a little less than 3 years, but it was about 3 years from my swearing in date, and served 3 terms as mayor of Lancaster.
That shows how quickly you kind of jumped into that community, and I can relate to being that stay-at-home dad while my wife travels a lot for work, and so I'm the one there doing the drop-offs and the pickups and taking them to dance and piano lessons and gymnastics. So it's certainly a unique opportunity, and frankly, I encourage more dads, if you can get some time away or you can make it work. Spending that time with your kids is wonderful. And
if I can add, my wife is a family practice physician who does OB, and babies come when they want to. And so somebody needed to be at home. When she was pregnant in residency, I mean, they're working many, many hours, over 100 hours a week sometimes. And there needed to be somebody at home. And I enjoyed it. And I would drop off my kids right around the time I became mayor was when the youngest started preschool. And I'd drop them off at school and go to City Hall, come back, pick them up. And they went to fish fries and chili feeds and all those fun things with me growing up. But when I wasn't in the office, I would have my office phone roll to my cell phone. And so it wasn't uncommon to be different places and answering the office while changing a diaper or helping out around the house.
Can you expand a little bit about your time as mayor of Lancaster? Any policy wins or, experiences from being mayor that you're going to take to being lieutenant governor?
I served 3 terms as mayor, 2-year terms, so 6 years as mayor. I didn't run for re-election in 2022, which was the same time I was running for lieutenant governor. Just to fill in a little bit of background there, I am a firm believer in term limits. I think we need to have them. And when you don't, you need to put them on yourself. And so from the first time I ran, I said, I'm going to do 3 or 4 terms and I will be done. And I did not run for a 4th term. Partly too, because I was running for lieutenant governor and didn't feel it was fair to the residents of Lancaster to be running for 2 offices, knowing you were only going to really fulfill one. But as mayor, I was the first mayor in over 20 years to use the veto, and I used it several times, primarily with tax issues and fee issues. Vetoed a 40% stormwater fee increase. I broke a tie on a proposed wheel tax in Lancaster, which I think wheel taxes are just horrible ideas. But even in Lancaster, we have South Lancaster and North Lancaster. There's businesses and residents in both. Why would we give people another reason to leave our city? And I think that is something I take with me if I was elected lieutenant governor, is we need to be more competitive with our neighbors. And in that office, as was Consul Lieutenant Governor, it would be making sure that we're more competitive in the Midwest. But as mayor of Lancaster, we don't want to help our local communities gain population because of our tax policy. But when I left Lancaster, we were the city in Grant County with the lowest taxes and the lowest utility fees.
Sorry, Shadow Gov, can I do one more?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, then you can go. Yeah, I've noticed that in local government, it becomes really easy to just tick that mill rate up a little and, kind of find those places to add taxes and fees. But I know, like, on the same side, local budgeting can often be tough. So great for you to be able to, make those tough decisions and, stand up for the taxpayers of your community.
Well, the other thing is it's really easy as an elected official that you get into office and you just go along and you try to make everybody happy. It happens. I've seen it happen to good people that get into an office and it does not work out as you would expect. I feel like I went in with certain ideas of things I wanted to do or accomplish. And while some specifics didn't happen simply because other things happened, like COVID, for example, that, our taxes were in a good place. We were financially in a good place. Unfortunately, since I've left, there have been tax increases and some of those issues came back and weren't decided the same way. But I felt like I made an impact. I accomplished a lot of things that I wanted to accomplish as mayor, and that we were very fiscally conservative, because a lot of times people talk a good game and then they get in there and they don't do it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought it up when we talked a lot about this, your local government experience, just because, at least personally, I see this a lot. And, I don't necessarily blame people for wanting to do this, but there seems to be a lot of people that think, for example, like Congress is like the ultimate place to be. And I respect those people. I respect our representatives 100%. It's a tough job in Congress and often a thankless job. But often I feel like there's a lot of good conservatives out there that believe the right things. They believe what we believe, but then they want to just go for that big office. It's nice and shiny, when in reality, you can have more impact as a local village trustee, mayor, on the people that, in your community. When you think about Congress, it makes a lot of huge decisions, but you're talking about a wheel tax. And, here in the Southeast, we hear a lot about Milwaukee County having wheel taxes and all kinds of new taxes. And I can't imagine having to pay all those as a resident of Milwaukee County, but you can have a really an outsized influence on your community as a local. And we don't put that, it's not a glamorous, it's a thankless job too, but it's a different than Congress. And I just think that I encourage, and I'm glad you're being a good advocate for this. And I wish more people would get into the local government first and, kind of work your way up, cause it is kind of like a tryout in a way. And you get you get to build a record. And, clearly you've already talked about, I believe these things, and then you've actually executed it at a local level. And, the best indicator of future performance is past performance.
One of my favorite Bible verses is where who can be trusted with the small things can be trusted with the big things. And that's something I've thought about often as I ran for mayor back when I was a council member and now. And the other thing I would want to add is when I was in high school, my senior year, my American government class, our council member came in. And I remember her saying, I impact your life more than the governor or the president. She said, who are you going to call if you go to turn on your water and it doesn't work? Or you go to flip on a light switch and it doesn't work? And I should add that our city ran the electric company where I grew up. And she said, I impact your life more than anything else. Potholes, sidewalks, parks. And I had never thought about that before. And it stuck with me all these years of how much power a local official truly has. And whether it's your local taxes, it's the utility fees, it's the parks, it's the sidewalks, it's the roads, all of those things impact you much more than the big national or big state issues do. And having that right person in there that casts that vote against the wheel tax or votes against that large tax increase, that is so important. And the last few years since I've left office, I have put a lot of focus on that. I spent 1 year as a local candidate mentor with Rebecca Clayfish's 1848 group, helping a candidate. I've recruited candidates in my own area and helped them and taught them how to run a local campaign and how to go door to door and what should be on flyers and talking them through all that. Because a lot of people might be willing to run for office, but they don't know how to run for office. And so I've spent a lot of time the last few years helping to recruit candidates and help candidates to be elected to local office, because that impacts their lives and their neighbors' lives so much more than, walking doors for a congressional candidate, for example. Not that that's not important, just those mayors, those council members, those school board members, that is so important.
100%.
No, I 100% agree. Yeah, as well. And, I think that, and I appreciate you brought up the 1848 project, and I know that's candidate side, but, and maybe this is a gripe, this is a personal gripe of my own, where it seems like, we see a number of people out there that will reach out to local officials about national issues. And then there will be those same people might reach out to their national people about local issues. And it seems like there's even, and maybe this is an inflection or a reflection of our schooling. And, it doesn't seem like people know what it is to be a citizen or even how our system works, because, that's one of the I don't want to say it's a problem, but it's one of the complications with having a democracy, a constitutional republic, where you have to be very vigilant. You have to understand the systems. It's not spoon fed to you. And unfortunately, a lot of people want, it to be spoon fed to you. Whereas we have to be vigilant. We have to be understanding, kind of keep up on it. But so I'm glad to hear that, part of 1848 helping candidates, but then also kind of shine a light on, yes, there is an avenue in local government. There is, and you would always think that the hard work, the cream rises to the top, and you get the best candidates from the local pool. That's not always the case, but I genuinely think that's a good principle to hold. So I appreciate what you've done, obviously, as mayor, and you got some good conservative bona fides already. But I just wanted a quick shift to a slightly different thing. Now, Lieutenant Governor, obviously, maybe not as powerful as some of the other lieutenant governors across the country. And speaking of Rebecca Clayfish, she kind of took the role and made it her own. And obviously as an advocate for the governor and the administration. But, if you were to have your kind of own niche that was given to you, or that you could create your own as lieutenant governor, and like maybe it's one or two issues that you would really want to be a messenger on, or, you could realistically, you could do whatever you wanted. There's a lot of flexibility to kind of be a bully pulpit or just an advocate, raise awareness. If you were to choose, what is your kind of your general vision, if elected lieutenant governor?
There would definitely be a soapbox if I was elected governor, and I would use it. I think the first thing that I would want to do is that we need to change our tax code. We need to reform our tax code and how we do things here. As I alluded to, I'm a former mayor in rural Wisconsin. It just so happens, though, that the county I'm from, Grant County, we're bordered by Illinois and Iowa. We compete with those states. And I served a term as president of Grant County Economic Development. And, what I saw happening was we were gaining businesses from Illinois, and we were losing businesses and employees to Iowa, because we could do better in our state. And we need to be a leader in the Midwest when it comes to tax code and what we charge our citizens and our businesses to be here. We need to do more, and we need to be more competitive, because mayors like me, communities like us that border these states, we want to keep the best employees and businesses in our state of Wisconsin. And quite frankly, we also need to keep our retirees, our students here. When people retire, we don't want them to be a snowbird and want to go down to Florida to spend 51% of the year. We don't want our students to graduate from high school or tech college or with a 4-year degree and go elsewhere because they can go right across the border to Iowa and pay less taxes there. We need to keep them here. And so that's a very important issue for me. Another one, and I have a few. I know you said one or two. I always have three or four.
Well, yeah, no, take it wherever you want.
We need to do more to fight illegal immigration. That's a big issue for me, especially for someone that grew up in Southern California. I have seen the negatives of that. And we need to make sure that our state and local law enforcement work with federal authorities to deport criminal illegal aliens. I'm tired of opening up the newspaper or going online and seeing these stories of people that should have been deported that were protected by authorities in some of our counties or fell through the cracks because they didn't want to turn them into federal immigration authorities. We need to ensure that that happens. We also need to make sure that we keep men out of women's sports and their locker rooms. I'm a girl dad. I have two daughters, one who's a cheerleader and one who plays basketball. Men do not belong in those sports with them. And finally, we need to do more on education. And I think the next Republican will, because Tony Evers, as much as he wanted to call himself the education governor, has failed. And it's not just as simple as we need to throw more money at education. We need to make sure that we raise our test scores, our standards, and our expectations for our students. And we also need to ensure that parents can choose the right education for their child and have a voice in that education. A parent's right to know what's being taught in their classroom should not be stopped at the door. There needs to be more transparency in what's going on in those classrooms. But those are a few of the issues that I would be on the soapbox for if elected lieutenant governor. I have my voice. And as lieutenant governor, I will use it for conservative values and to change our state for the better, because we definitely need to do things the right way. And unfortunately, as much as the legislature has tried really hard to send good bills up, especially on taxes, to provide tax relief, Governor Evers has stood in the way. And we really have an opportunity here in 2026 to change that and not only see these thoughts become bills, but become laws and be signed by a conservative governor.
Fantastic.
I'm surprised Shadow Gov didn't just cheer when you brought up illegal immigration and stopping it.
I'm allowed to let David finish his, question. We're just being respectful. But yes, there's a silent fist pump. I
felt the same way as a girl dad. I was doing the same thing for, keeping men out of women's sports. Please, that is,
it's a shame
issue
that we even have to have that discussion. It shouldn't even be it really is kind of an indictment on the state of our politics, where that has to be a talking point. That has to be even a discussion point. It shouldn't be debated at all. But in regards to legal immigration, Wisconsin is kind of a unique state because we don't probably have as many illegals as California does. It still is an issue, though. And unfortunately, you do see the stories where, an illegal immigrant, maybe got behind the wheel drunk. And, there was a situation in Dane County. Those were two Minnesota teenagers, but still happened here in Wisconsin and from someone that lived, I think, in Portage County at the time. So it's a huge issue. But, I'm going to acquiesce the illegal immigration and even actually talk about the education part, because I think that is the key to the governor's race and, lieutenant governor's race as well as they're intertwined. Because, like you said, Tony Evers, education governor. I mean, he campaigned on that. He campaigned on the Scott holes and the transparency and such. But really, the education thing, it's kind of hard to vote against the school superintendent, who's just a nice guy. And what have we learned? We've just learned that standards don't matter. Actually, standards do matter, but let's decrease the standards. And it's not getting any better anytime soon. And Republicans, frankly, have not always done a great job on the education policy. And that's probably, in fact, because of a lot of the outsized influence that the unions have. But I'm really glad you brought up the education, because I think it's so key, and Republicans can't run away from that issue. We have to be the advocates, especially because of the school choice issue being so popular now. And frankly, the Democrats losing a lot of ground in that area.
I think what Governor Evers has done wrong, I mean, he's done a lot wrong here, but on education, his solution every time was, let's just throw more money at it. Every budget that he put forward, it was just more money. It wasn't changing anything else. And that's where the mistake is. we obviously need to change some things. I think that school choice provides the vehicle for that. Because if we start making schools compete, if we start making them have to increase their standards or what they're teaching, or make sure they're having the best teachers, students win because it becomes more competitive. And they know parents are looking at, should I send my kid to this school or this school? And I think that right there is the best vehicle to do that.
Amen.
So I want to talk about another policy area. One that, hits for me is you mentioned you were the past president of the Grant County Economic Development Corporation. Could you talk about your time there and how that experience how you could use that experience statewide?
Yeah, I was part of that group my entire time as mayor, and then I served a year as president of that group. I think not only in that role and those issues shaped who I am, it's where I'm from. And I'm from Southwest Wisconsin against two other states that have wildly different tax policy and very different policy when it comes to business. And you see what works and you see what doesn't. And Cuba City, which is right near the border of Wisconsin with Illinois, they kept running out of room in their business park when Illinois increased their income tax and then did the gas tax that we saw a few years ago. They couldn't keep up because there were so many businesses from Illinois that were trying to move just over the border. I think it gives me a very different perspective versus maybe if I lived in a different area where you're competing against other communities. Here we're competing against other states, and the policy of tax and businesses, all those issues become very important, and it shapes the economic development thoughts that I have and the priorities I would have if next lieutenant governor of Wisconsin.
Yeah, it felt like during the Walker administration that you couldn't go more than a week or two without reading a story about a small manufacturer moving their business from Illinois up to Wisconsin just to go right across that border and take advantage of our better policies then, and Illinois' more challenging, more higher taxes and more difficult policy. So,
and Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Clayfish, she even said, I'm not just going after the extremely large businesses, I'm going after the small ones and the medium-sized ones. And those were coming to Wisconsin too. And I think that's very inspirational. If I was elected the next lieutenant governor, it's not just about getting the really big fish. It's about trying to get all these businesses to want to move to Wisconsin, creating that excitement that Wisconsin is the place to do business. Wisconsin is the place to stay after graduation. Wisconsin is the place I want to move to. And quite frankly, as I said earlier, I moved here. My family, we moved to Wisconsin. And my wife came here because she wanted to be a rural physician. And we fell in love with Lancaster and with Southwest Wisconsin. This is our home. And it's because we were given the opportunity to come and look at it. And we love what we saw. And we need to make sure that we are trying to bring more residents here to our state and keep the ones that we have.
Perfect. Well, I was actually going to pivot slightly back to campaign stuff, but this is a more of a general question relating to kind of the state of the Republican Party in Wisconsin right now. Whereas obviously we've had kind of a string of defeats, which have sucked, to be quite frank. I love election night. I love sitting down, poring over the numbers, the anxiety as the numbers come in and trying to analyze, do we have enough votes? Where do we need them? But, as we get more and more, especially the April elections, it's becoming slightly more depressing. So, and you've done some campaign work. Obviously you're running currently. So you're someone who's experienced in the campaign world, but what is maybe just your outlook? And obviously running for a statewide office, you're going to have some thoughts and some ideas, but how can we right the ship in a way? I mean, the state legislature, we have the state legislature currently, that might be up for debate with the new maps, which make it a lot, more difficult, but that statewide hump, we just can't seem to get over. So whether it's, maybe there's a strategy that we're not implementing, maybe there's a kind of voter that we're just not in touch with as much. What are just some of your general thoughts, when you look at the, the state of our elections and how we can actually get over that hump and hopefully win the governorship and lieutenant governorship, and then but not just a one-off. I don't want just a one-off. You look at Scott Walker's, that 8-year run, that was fantastic. And I just don't want to have this kind of back and forth where we have to get these good policies and then have a Supreme Court just overturn them or slowly roll them back. And it just seems like we're taking one step forward and 2 steps back. So yeah, feel free to take that anywhere you want to go with it.
Yeah. And I should add, I was the vice chairman of the Grant County Republican Party for 10 years from 2012 until 2022 or through the 2022 election. So I've had a very unique front row seat for what was happening in Grant County and in our region. But Donald Trump won Grant County in 2016, and he became the first Republican to win Grant County since President George H.W. Bush won Grant County in 1988. It had gone Democratic for many years. In fact, Barack Obama in 2008 got 61% of the vote in Grant County. The last 3 presidential cycles, it has gone red. It went for Donald Trump those 3 times. And in between that, Tony Evers actually won Grant County in 2018, just barely eking out past Scott Walker. But Tim Michels won it in 22. And so it was one of just a handful of counties that flipped, that went from Evers to the Republican candidate. And I think that does kind of provide a roadmap. I think there needs to be more attention to the west side of the state. There's been a lot of conversation about how the west side of the state is trending much more red. People are moving from Minnesota. They're moving from Illinois. They're coming into these areas, and we need to do more outreach there. And I think, and this is very self-serving, I know, but a ticket that has a lieutenant governor from the west side of the state on it, I think would be very helpful. But I think overall, we need to have more candidates that are from different parts of the state. And I think that in 26, because we'll have all of the state offices on the ballot at once, it would be very helpful to have people that are from different regions because it helps with the turnout there. I was surprised in 22 when I found out how many people that lean Democratic just wanted to vote in the Republican primary for me because they wanted somebody from Western Wisconsin because it was not a normal occurrence here. In fact, there's only been one statewide office holder from Lancaster, and that is the very first governor of Wisconsin, Nelson Dewey. He's from Lancaster. And there's a statue to him on our square, and he's buried here in Lancaster. But since then, our candidates have mostly come from the southeast corner, and I think having a balance is important to that ticket. And it helps people be able to connect with the Republican Party. Because I look at what's happening on the Democratic side, and I think, there's all these far left progressives from Dane County and Milwaukee. And do people really look at that and say that person best represents them? Well, if you live in Dane County, you probably do. But the rest of the state, no. And your podcast last week talked a lot about the individual governor candidates and how are people going to connect with them and what type of person will connect with this candidate and that candidate. And I think the Republican Party really has an opportunity here to have people that connect with suburban voters and rural voters and urban voters, because we're going to have a wide array of candidates on our statewide ballot.
Yeah. No, I know that the Western Wisconsin narrative, it might be self-serving, but I do think it is correct. The numbers don't lie. And that, Derek Van Orden obviously has won that district and it has been trending right. But it just seems like, Western Wisconsin has a very salt of the earth people that they're willing to look at things maybe slightly different, where it seems the Southeast is just, it's almost balkanized in a way where you even Schimmel, when he ran for Supreme Court, he hammered the Southeast. He hammered Waukesha County and he still got 59%. And it seems like at the very least, if we have a good get out the vote effort, Waukesha County, if we can get 59%, just call it a day. We're not going to get 65. We're not going to get 70, certainly. Can we get 60, 61, maybe, and then call it a day? Whereas we actually have an ability to move numbers in, Western Wisconsin, where not just move like a percentage or, a half percentage, but like major swings. And we don't want to certainly lose those people back to the Democrats.
I think that Democrats are still baffled by what happens in the southwest corner and the western side of the state when it comes to legislative districts. Howard Markline is my state senator, and he has always been in a district that has gone blue. But yet he still wins. Why? Because he knocks on everybody's door and he has a message that connects with voters. I'm represented by Travis Tranel. His district until recently also blue, and he was always head of the ticket. Todd Novak is right nearby, and everybody thought he was going to lose his seat for sure in this last election. And he outworked his opponent, and he had a message that resonated. And I think that is an important message for Republicans, is talk about these issues. Talk about men and women's sports, illegal immigration, tax code. People are hurting right now, and those messages connect with them. The Democratic Party talks about all these things, and I think the average person looks at them and think, do you think that's important right now? You think that's a message that I care about? I think people are worried about how they're going to put food on their table. And when the inflation is going to go back down to what it was the last time President Trump was in office. Those are the issues that connect with people. And I think putting in the time and having a good message is going to lift us.
Yeah, I've had that experience in the economic development world and getting coffee with people and them saying to me, like, I'm a Democrat, but I'm not whatever that is. Like, I'm not that liberal, that progressive. And that was, 3 years ago, right? And also I can relate in that I worked a campaign for Representative Ed Brooks when his last race was in 2016. And I took us a minute to kind of click because he thought I was the city slicker that only saw cows at the state fair. And I did find out and told him, and I said, yeah, cows are kind of mean. Like, we'd go drive to some doors and I'd go see this cow. It'd start kicking a fence. And I'm like, they take the nice ones to the fair. They leave the mean ones at home. So I got a real first class education in rural campaigning from him. So I actually kind of want to ask the flip side of that question, which is Lancaster's 2.5 hours from Milwaukee, kind of from that east, like straight shot, it looks like. How are you kind of getting in with the folks in southeastern Wisconsin? Again, because it's just a high population area, and even kind of that eastern half of the state's really where a lot of the population is. So how do you kind of balance that campaign, or how do you talk? I guess, how do you talk to them? But you know what I mean.
Well, for starters, you got to spend time there, and that's definitely something I'm working to do even now. Just a few days ago, I was in Kenosha, in the southeast corner, because you got to get out there. That's where the votes are. And for example, in the last election, almost 1 in 6 votes were from Waukesha County. Mm-hmm. And so you have to put the time in there. And in 22, Waukesha County was the county I visited the most. Second was Dane County, because I saw that as important as well, to not only be looking for votes, but to be out there talking about the issues and try to maybe flip some of these people who are on the fence, or be talking about these messages that connect with voters that aren't simply looking at something as who's the R and who's the D. You got to be talking issues, and being there, I think, and it helps invest in some of that time. But yeah, you got to be out there connecting with voters. But I also think I have a message there that matters too. And as I said earlier, I'm a former congressional aide who did housing, water, and transportation issues in suburban Los Angeles. I understand some of the issues that people are facing in Milwaukee and in Waukesha County and in Washington County, some of these suburban areas. Plus I have the rural connection. And so it allows me to understand some of these issues when people are talking about roads, or their concerns about trains and things that we might not necessarily deal with interstate traffic in Lancaster, but I have a background of working with that, and I can talk in an educated way about those issues. And that's why I think I have a very unique background that most elected officials or most people running for office don't have, because I've worn a few hats, and I've had a lot of quick education on issues.
So you touched on this a little earlier in the interview, and I know you've shared some Bible verses on social media. So I want you to just talk about your faith and how your Christian background influences your approach to governance, and take it away.
Mm-hmm. I became a Christian in college, and it changed my worldview. And I immediately became a conservative. I transferred from a state university in Southern California to California Baptist University within a year of becoming a Christian, and definitely had a different worldview at a Southern Baptist University. But it definitely changed who I was. And it led to me working at a Christian ministry. It led to me caring more about the future that we leave our kids and about caring for one another, but also making sure that we allow people to realize the blessing that it is to live in such a free country, in a democracy, or in a constitutional republic, but a place where your voice matters and your vote matters, and you can raise your kids the way you want to raise them. And you should have a voice in that education as you try to equip your children to become the next generation that comes in and leads our country. But my faith drives a lot of what I do and what I see. And I think that trusting in God and following his leading is one of the greatest things that I can do. And I'm trying to raise my kids in a way that they see my love for Christ, and that they see that I care about my neighbor and try to treat my neighbor as myself, and try to make sure that I lead them in a way that they can lead going forward.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And just piggybacking off of that, I kind of go back and forth on this because, as a Christian as well, it's kind of hard not to see kind of the spiritual battle that is ongoing all the time around us. And I know sometimes we don't always think about it, and that's okay. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we can see it right in front of our eyes, whereas the spiritual battle sometimes is waged around us and kind of in the background. But, it kind of drives me insane when liberals and progressives, they say separation of church and state, separation of church and state. And what they say that they mean is, oh, we don't want a theocracy. But in practice, they often mean, we want you to divorce your religiosity from your actual policy making. And that's not, I can't do that. It's, where do you receive your morals from? Do you just receive them from depending on how you're feeling that day, or do you have a concrete thing that is never changing, will be here and forevermore? Is that going to be that's your North Star? And it drives me up a wall that we're always told we can't have any moral foundation based off of religion in Christianity, whereas essentially the left has their own religion. It's the religion of moral relativism or whatever they're feeling that day. And so,
and I like to always ask, where do you draw your worldview from? How do you decide what's right and wrong? And it's like, well, I do. I said, but how do you do that? How does government do that? My faith drives what I see as right and wrong. My faith my faith leads me to understand that life is important at every stage. My faith drives me to want to treat my neighbor as myself, but understand that we can't just hold on to people all the way through and put them on government resources forever, that we need to help them so that they can go out on their own. And my faith also tells me that if someone commits horrible crimes, they need to go to prison. We shouldn't be letting these people out early. And it's just so amazing to get those answers back, because they just don't understand that. But government needs to have at its center a moral center. Mm-hmm. And our founding fathers were very clear in the Federalist Papers and in the Constitution that they expected that this government was going to be led by people who had faith in God, and that that at the basis of that was going to be a faith in God that would direct them as they tried to decide what was right and wrong.
And I just think that message, first of all, I know a lot of Republicans talk about Christianity and their faith, and I appreciate them for that. But I think, and maybe this is just the advantage of being on a podcast, where we get that extra level, that you don't often get in the stump speech about Christianity. And I think that there's a lot of people that are yearning for that and want that, and have, they've heard the bumper sticker Christianity slogan. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's not. But I think I'm maybe talking, maybe this is my own self talking, that I want to hear that from our local officials. And I'm not saying you have to be in the pulpit preaching all the time. You're a government official. I understand that, but I just feel like we're missing that. And like you said, when you look at our form of government and our laws, you can see where the Christian morals and the way our country was founded line up almost perfectly in many regards. And then you look at what the left is giving us, and it's antithetical. It's the complete inverse of it. And I don't know how you can not be romantic about this marriage between church and state, where it's not a theocracy, but the fact that they're just so intertwined, you cannot divorce them. So I'm glad to hear that, this is a strong part of, your background. And I encourage others that are running for office to also bring this up more.
I attended a Charlie Kirk memorial, but it was also for other victims. I'm sorry, it was a candlelight service for victims of political violence in Platteville. And there were hundreds of people there. And I was asked to say a few words. And I got up there and I read some scripture and I prayed and I gave a few-minute talk about how we impact our world and how we can make for a big change right here if we take the example of Charlie Kirk and we move forward with being driven by our faith. And it was amazing, the feedback that I got and the other speakers received as well. I think what happened with Charlie Kirk that was meant for evil, the other part of that is the good that we're seeing now that is coming from people awakening to not only what Charlie Kirk believed, but what he stood for. And it's just an awakening that's amazing as you go around, especially young people right now. But I'm still getting messages from people that heard me talk. And it was amazing how many people at the end of that service wanted to come forward and talk to a pastor or an elder or be prayed for. It really awakened something in our communities and in our state. But I will also add that, on Charlie Kirk's birthday, I wore red and I did a post about it. Mm-hmm. And there were some good comments and people liked the post on Facebook and Twitter. But then, of course, you have somebody who, very cowardly hides behind some type of anonymous name and posted on my campaign page, hashtag be like Charlie DOA.
Saw that.
And it's just amazing, the evil that is still in our world. And even on a day like this, people from the other side, they just can't even behave. They see this as a moment to ridicule, where we on the right see this as a moment to pray for our country, to pray for Charlie Kirk's family and his loved ones and the Turning Point organization. And there's still people out there that this is their reaction when you say, we need to stop political violence. And they have a fake profile so that they can continue to try to incite things.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs, obviously. And again, it kind of, I'll just piggyback off of some current events here. Dan O'Donnell was talking about the resolution that was in the legislature. He just tweeted about it just a couple hours ago as we're recording here, and talking about that only one Democrat voted for the resolution condemning, political violence and the Charlie Kirk resolution. And only one Democrat voted for the resolution. And first of all, big praise to that Representative Sylvia Ortiz-Velez for standing up and being able to vote her conscience and say, hey, this should be an easy thing, but everyone else. And just kind of realizing, hey, I guess this is where we're at. And it's unfortunate. It doesn't matter if you're a local official, doesn't matter if you're just, village trustee on the board, the president of the United States, the governor, lieutenant governor candidate. It seems like everyone, at least on the right, will get these kind of threats.
Yep. And I think it's interesting, what happened in the legislature is similar to what happened on the federal level. You did have the Senate unanimously pass the resolution that came out after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. But then in the House of Representatives, there were dozens of people that voted no and dozens of people that voted present. Why is that? Why can we not agree that this type of violence is wrong? Is it because they truly believe that it's okay, or is it because they don't want to upset their base? And there is a problem there.
There's no good answers from either of those choices. No, either of those choices are bad and have different implications, but they're equally bad.
So, David, we have 3 questions that we like to ask every guest. And so you're going to be the second person that gets these 3 big questions. First is, if you could pick one iconic Wisconsin spot, whether it's a supper club, brewery, Packers tailgate, to hold a voter rally, where would it be and what would it look like? What are you going to talk to voters about? What are you going to be eating there?
Okay, this was a really hard question. And it's funny because I've been thinking about it for almost 2 weeks since you asked it to Josh Showman. So I thought, man, if I get that question, what am I going to say? Mm-hmm. And I'm totally torn. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I have one big answer, but I'm going to say that the close runner-up was Road America. Nice. Because I'm a huge NASCAR fan. It saddens me that NASCAR is not there right now. IndyCar still is, but I love Road America. But I thought that's a place that everybody knows. And so I don't want to give the easy answer. And my choice would be Sunrise Lodge, right outside of Land O'Lakes, sits on a lake that is divided by the Michigan-Wisconsin border. And it has been there for decades. It's family ran, and my family and I go there every summer. And we spend a week on the lake. They have old school entertainment. It's kayaks, basketball court, tennis court, bicycles for everybody. It is unplugging in lots of different ways and just being up in nature. And Wisconsin, the Northwoods are so beautiful in Wisconsin. And I just love going up there to be recharged. But up there, I ran for lieutenant governor once before. And when I'm up there, the people still find me, whether it's our fishing guide or the owner of Sunrise Lodge, and they want to talk about issues. And it is still inflation and tax policy. And I think those are the issues that I would be talking about up there if I was given a rally on the shores of the lake there at Sunrise Lodge in Land O'Lakes.
I don't know if there's any better way to get your mind right and reset than a week unplugged in northern Wisconsin on a lake. So sounds awesome.
4 days after I lost the 22 primary, we were there. And that was the best place to go and unplug.
Perfect. So, having moved to Wisconsin and served in Wisconsin, what's one lesson from the state's heartland, whether it's, a family farm, small town festival, or a hunting trip that, shapes your conservative approach to leadership?
It really, being a small city mayor, it is really the impact that you have on people's everyday lives. I think when you're in a much bigger city or a much bigger district, sometimes you don't think about the individual person. When you live in a city of 4,000 and you're leading it, and they can show up at your house because everybody knows where you live, or they can call your phone and they'll reach you, you really come to realize the impact that it has. And on paper, a tax increase might not seem like much, but then you hear these stories from people that are talking about what that increase means to them, or what the impact of this policy or that policy has. It's the impact of the person. And that's something that if I'm elected the next lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, that I'll take with me, is these issues impact people down to the individual. And so remember them when you make these decisions.
All right. Third question. You get a magic wand, so you don't have to worry about getting reelected, working with the legislature. You just get one policy, progressive policy, that you get to roll back, whether it's high taxes, woke gender, neutral language, and administrative rules. What's one policy that on day one you want to roll back?
Easy. If I could wave the magic wand, we would be the best tax rate in the Midwest. We got to get there. And that would be mine.
Fantastic. Fourth big question, David, where can people go to find out more about you? Socials, website, give us all the links.
It's davidvarnum.com. On X, I'm at dvarnum. And at Facebook, I'm at David C. Varnum. And Varnum is spelled V as in victory, AR, N as in Nancy, A as in Apple, M as in Mary. DavidVarnum.com.
David Varnum, it's been a pleasure to have you come sit with us for a couple minutes. Really appreciate you taking the time. Wish you best on the campaign trail. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen. I appreciate it.